What's good? What's good? What's good, y'all? 32 teams, all of them for fantasy. We're talking Tennessee Titans today in fantasy football. Make sure you guys drop a sub, hit the like button for me on this video, all right? Tennessee Titans. Got Brian Callahan, as the coach now, and new coordinator in Nick Holt. So former Jags passing game coordinator. This offense will look a little bit different this upcoming season, especially because obviously this will be Will Levis's first year starting. There's a lot of new pieces on this offense, so it's going to take me a minute. Let's break down what this thing looks like in terms of fantasy, redraft, dynasty, just for the Titans overall this upcoming season. All right. First, we got to talk about the quarterback position, Will Levis, who came in towards the second half of last season. Obviously, once Ryan Tannehill got hurt, some strong showings in his rookie season, and he also had some duds, some terrible ones, right? Started 8 games, and I think we saw some of the upside why his team took him in the second round, why there was a lot of people considering him in the first round last year in the draft before he was actually taken in the second round. He had 4 TDs in his very first start. We saw a lot of those deep bombs to DeAndre Hopkins. I know y'all remember the game, 3 touchdowns for D-Hop. But the one area I expected him to be a lot better in that he wasn't was his rushing, his mobility. I thought he was going to give us a little bit of something on the ground. We didn't really see a whole lot of that last season. So obviously there's a couple new pieces here on this offense. Some bigger names free agency wise were brought in to support this. And I think Will Levis has the upside that you want to see and has kind of all the things you want to see in like a sleeper quarterback. So when I look at Will Levis, this is a player that I think he has upside, but there's some risk baked in, right? Like if he can't give us more than what he was giving us consistency-wise last season, it's going to be a long year for Will Levis. But with the weapons around him, I just don't see how he's set up really well to succeed. So for me, there's a lot of potential with Will Levis to be in like the QB2 conversation, like top 15 quarterback, and you're getting him well outside the top 20. So for me, even with the new coaching staff, they've talked about making things comfortable for Will Levis, getting him in spots to succeed. And when you got, receivers like Calvin Ridley, who the team signed in the offseason, DeAndre Hopkins, obviously a veteran receiver. And then you got Tony Pollard in the backfield too, like somebody that can give you a little bit of juicing in the passing game, especially like TYJAE Spears already does that. Like there's a lot to like with Will Levis when it comes to potential upside here. So give me Will Levis as one of my sleeper candidates this year. I think he'll have a very strong season here in his second year. Talked about running backs. Let's start with TYJAE Spears, who was the RB34 last year as a rookie. Played decent with Derrick Henry, but a lot of people are expecting him to take over a major role here in this offense. He had 453 yards on the ground last year, 385 in the air. Obviously, and had 3 touchdowns last season. So he played decent in a complimentary role, but there were some games where we saw him and he looked like he could be the real deal. Runs very hard, can finish off games. So we like what TYJAE Spears brings. Just they also added Tony Pollard, who I'll talk about here in a second. But 4 out of the last 6 games we saw TYJAE Spears on the field, he had double-digit performances in PPR leagues. So obviously the upside is there for him to be a weekly contributor to our lineups, and he's going outside of the top 30 running backs right now. There could be some value for TYJAE Spears. Just don't reach on him thinking he's the RB1 for this team. Let him prove that to you and take him at the right draft spot. And then also Tony Pollard. I think Tony Pollard, man, last year in Dallas, the minute he got the starting gig, it was like, oh shit, Tony Pollard, top 5 running back. We got to put him in the upper echelon. And when you look at the frame, he just wasn't built like that. He's not built to be a feature back. And I think the Titans signing him to kind of complement what TYJAE Spears does, it was a really good indication that they're going to look to put Tony Pollard in good situations. This to me feels like a 1A, 1B situation where it flips at times, right? Sometimes we'll get TYJAE Spears as the one. Sometimes we'll get Tony Pollard as the one, depending on the game script. But even in a kind of a down season, I would say, for Tony Pollard, he finishes the RB14. The RB14, which is, as a top 15 back for a player who, was the RB8 even the year before that. I see there's a lot of value when we can get Tony Pollard outside of the top 20 running backs. So he had 1,000 yards last year, 6 touchdowns, 55 catches, 311 yards in the air. So, and that was as Dallas' starter with really no running backs. dealt with getting nicked up at times, and obviously was a little slow on the start coming off that broken fibula the season before that. I think Tony Pollard could surprise people in fantasy. Now, it all depends on where things shake out ADP-wise, but I think he was – the one thing is he's back in the complimentary role. And we saw with Dallas, it was like it's almost better when you give Tony Pollard less work, less reliability, because his body stays fresh for those explosive plays. And then you can use TYJAE Spears a little bit more between the tackles or a little bit more as the bruiser. I think Tony Pollard's in for a really good season, especially if Will Levis can hit some checkdowns, get the ball out in space to the running back and make some easy completions. All right. So Meek Callahan came from Cincinnati, where we saw Joe Mixon play well. We have, Nick Holtz come from Jacksonville, where we saw Travis Etienne. I think these running backs are going to be used, and Tony Pollard kind of fits like that Travis Etienne type mold. So I don't think he gets the same type of volume, and I do think this is a dual back situation. But Tony Pollard, it wouldn't surprise me to see him in the top 15, top 20 running backs this year on a pretty comfortably. All right, and then receiver, big free agent move with Calvin Ridley coming to the Titans. Calvin Ridley last year vaulted up towards the end of summer, vaulted up after seeing the training camp videos and offseason workouts of him looking explosive, right? Obviously, we know not to put too much stock into one video now. We should, if we're watching this channel. There's a lot more to it than just one offseason video. But he vaulted up into like the top 12 wide receivers, and some people were taking him in the top 10, which it got a little crazy towards drafts and the season starting. He finished as a wide receiver 18, so not bad. And I think he was widely considered a disappointment. He played well. I think that's where, I kind of expected his range to be in that 18 to 25 range. He was just a little inconsistent, and had he caught a few more touchdowns, maybe we're talking about him differently. But he got paid well to be the wide receiver one for the Tennessee Titans and complement what DeAndre Hopkins brings to the table. But Brian Callahan's already come out and said, look, we want to use this guy like Jamar Chase, which is really exciting. When you say, Jamar Chase, this isn't just stuff downfield. That's getting him short action stuff, close to the line of scrimmage, letting him go in space. So last year he had 76 catches. I think the number will go up, and he had 1,016 yards, 8 touchdowns. So I think, for everything everybody was excited with Calvin Ridley last season, right? We hadn't seen him since Atlanta, the gambling stuff. And then, he looks really good in Atlanta. We were trying to gauge where he's at. He's older now, 29 years old. I think this season could be a really nice season for Calvin Ridley, who wants to prove he's one of the elite receivers in the game. So especially if they're going to give him Jamar Chase type usage and we can get somewhere, the 130 to 150 target marker, like this could be a really big season for Calvin Ridley here in Tennessee, especially Will Levis, the way he was chucking the ball last year. If we can get some improvement out of him, we're talking. So Calvin Ridley could be a value. He's going outside the top 30 wide receivers as of right now, and I think that's way too low. I was saying fade Calvin Ridley last season. That is way too low for a guy who was the wide receiver 18 last season in a down year. So don't forget about Calvin Ridley. I think he's going to be one of the better values in the draft. Maybe as we get closer to the NFL actually starting, we'll see a little bit more. But I think right now, going outside the top 30 receivers is disrespectful to who Calvin Ridley is as a player. So give me Calvin Ridley. I love the upside there. I think just the draft spot is a very good it's sleeper territory at this point. Sleeper territory. You can get really good value on him. He's being disrespected in drafts. And like I said, I faded Calvin Ridley last year. I'm buying Calvin Ridley this year. Believe that. And then the other receiver, obviously on the other starting receiver, we'll say DeAndre Hopkins. And a lot of people think DeAndre Hopkins fell off. He was right behind Calvin Ridley last year as the wide receiver 22. So he fits in wide receiver 3 categories. We're getting him outside the top 30 wide receivers as well. And, like I said, a lot of people think he had a disappointing year. He had 75 catches, 1,057 yards, and 7 touchdowns. So for like DeAndre Hopkins, if we can get any kind of consistency out of him, out of Will Levis, maybe his game changes too. Like, I don't think he fell off. I think on a weekly basis, we can still expect wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 type numbers. He might just be a little bit more inconsistent this year. Put it that way. Like DeAndre Hopkins just might be a little bit more inconsistent. That's it. And we got to just rock with it because Calvin Ridley is going to be the wide receiver 1 for this team. So unless Will Levis takes like a big major turn, productive wise, and he's throwing for 4,500 yards. I think we just kind of got to know, like, DeAndre Hopkins, maybe he's not who he was, but he could still be very impactful for our fantasy teams, especially as a wide receiver 3. So, yes, the name power for DeAndre Hopkins holds a little bit of weight, but he's also being disrespected because he had been injured in Arizona his last year. And then in Tennessee, he didn't have a strong showing with Tannehill and rookie Will Levis. I think this offseason, hopefully we get a little bit more out of him, and I still think he has a lot left to prove. Not wide receiver 1 left to prove, but still, we can get decent wide receiver 3 numbers out of DeAndre Hopkins at wide receiver 4 prices in this year's draft. And then the wide receiver 3 for this team is Tyler Boyd. He was just recently signed this offseason, back with Callahan now in Tennessee. And him and Treylon Burks are going to be competing for that wide receiver 3 spot. I think Boyd gets it, but don't forget about Burks either. And unfortunately, he hasn't cut on as a former first-round pick. This team expected a lot out of him, but they're both kind of like sneaky waiver wire potential, like ads. They're deep league ads, like your 16-team leagues. These guys, one of these guys could pop off, especially if D-Hop or Calvin Ridley goes down or something happens, right? So Tyler Boyd especially will slot in as a wide receiver 3. He's pretty much been a wide receiver 4 or 5 his entire career, and I think he maintains that level at a much better price, obviously. And then Burks just has so much upside and so much untapped potential. He just has to stay on the field and he has to play better. So I think he'll probably be the wide receiver 4. Has some upside if something were to happen, but for now, both of those guys deserve to be on waivers. And then CHIG OKONKWO, right? He was a tight end 21 last year. And there's a lot of people that have hyped him up, especially in dynasty circles. Fantasy-wise, there's always like, oh, man, he looks the part, right? He looks like he should have more to his game, and he doesn't. He's just more hyped than he is production at this point, right? Last year, he had 1 double-digit game. 1! And he finished the tight end 21, that's fine, but he's just not a big part of this offense, and the team just got more receivers. Just went out and got Calvin Ridley and Tyler Boyd. So he had 528 yards. Like, he'll be a decent threat through the air. Only 1 touchdown. He's not a big red zone guy. I just don't see it for CHIG, and I think you can find better upside around his draft position. I just don't see it. If you see it, let me know in the comments if you think differently, all right? So that does it for the Tennessee Titans. Let me know if you agree, disagree, if there's any other players that I didn't talk about or you want me to go more extensive. Make sure to check out the other teams on this list, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace out.